Hi guys, I am on Serpent Symbolism Part 2. Welcome. I have been working most of the day just building my PowerPoint presentation. We're going to jump ahead. We're going to actually start at slide 40 and work our way up to 90. So it is going to be a bit long. There's a lot of it is actually just Gerald Massey quotes from his two books, the Natural Genesis, Volume 1 and 2. So, Talking Snakes, Part 2. This again, we're trying to understand why is the snake talking. And then of course I just have a picture of King Nebuchadnezzar, and we're going to kind of see a little bit about why that's there, but it goes back to that, the stellar body. And of course you have some artwork here with the serpent in the spine, and that's the Kundalini, right? And it's like the cobra's neck here is like your ribs. But so yeah, I hope you guys saw part 1. That was probably a good place to start. But here's part 2. We're going to talk about the serpent Jacob, or Israel, or the serpent as Israel, and yeah, because even Israel, we'll see, is going to be related to something we're going to talk about later, and then I'll let you know. The serpent Leviathan in Genesis and in Leviticus. So the serpent Dan and Gerald Massey quotes. So not necessarily going to be in that order. I'm gonna wanted to get this out. Jacob, or Jacob, is Israel, right? So yeah, Jacob becomes Israel. He gets his new name, and he's the father of the 12 patriarchs. The Devil's Pulpit by Reverend Robert Taylor says on page 6, and he talks about the Greek word for saints, in the proper significancy of that word, never having meant any persons that ever existed upon earth, but referring only to the stars of heaven, or the holy ones of God as the holy city, and the city of David, and the city of our God, and the Jerusalem, in which all these fallings and risings again, these crucifixions, resurrections, and ascensions, than which no language of astronomy could possibly be more astronomical, do all of them annually occur, was no Jerusalem, no city, no place on earth, but Jerusalem which is above. And then on page 6, he has, the apostle expressly admonishes us in these words to the Colossians, set your affections on things above, not on the things of the earth, that is, set your understanding and apprehension on the great principles of astronomical science, and do not be so stupid as to suppose that Jesus Christ and his apostles were persons that ever existed upon the earth. So here I can get rid of So here it talks about bearing in mind what the name James means. And it's always rendered into Latin Jacobus, which is the termination us, merely grammatical, leaves us with the name Jacob. That is Yak. So that's, or Jacob, the name from Genesis 26:36. And then Yakis is the direct name of the god Bacchus, the god of wine. That's quite interesting. But Ab is a direct name of God, as signifying the Father. So it's Ab or Abba, Abba Raham, or Abram, the Father, the Ram, as being the father of the 12 patriarchs, or the 12 signs of the Zodiac, the 12 divisions of Zodiac, which he says right away in Devil's Pulpit. And then the serpent in the Egyptian language or hieroglyphs was OB, right? Circle is the tail, and then you have the head is the shape of the bee, signifying the father, indifferently styled Ab. That's what we talked about. Abraham is the father of many nations. Initially Abram or Abram, serpent ram, serpent, Aries of the Zodiac. Then is the grandson, becomes the father of the 12 houses. So it's almost like it's going through another cycle or another generation of the zodiac symbols. And then the Ptolemy 2nd century astrology shows us that signs were called houses. And then everybody gets their new name when they finish the cycle, or finish a cycle. And then if this is Israel, right, well, what do Christians call themselves? Spiritual Israelites. And this is kind of based on the spiritual law of the Jews. Israel seems to break down as the Egyptian Isis or the goddess Mary Isis, parallel to Mary, the mother of Christ, and into Ra, the sun god of Egypt, as the summer solstice, and into El, the Hebrew term for God in singular. If you think about this in terms of the sacred geometry and gematria, God is in heaven is the diameter of the circle of the zodiac. The bottom half of the zodiac is the feminine Isis, and the top is the sunny Ra. The bottom half is also associated with flesh. So then you have the heavens and the earth is Israel. And that's what the language says, like in Genesis too. It has, these are the generations of the heavens and the earth. Another way to understand the word Isis Ra'el is then the redshift, blue shift, the masculine and feminine, the conscious, the feeling, and the day god, double meaning with day and night, or the summer and winter god, the year and the Ya god. Another interpretation of the word Israel has been the temple of Ra, or Ptah. I think it was actually Ptah. I don't know why I put Ra. This would be fine as well, since the body is often called a temple in spirituality, and the stellar man is the body of the zodiac. Zodiac has the meaning of life being, Manly P. Hall, The Secret Teachings of All Ages. Page 149, the father god is then the shining serpent or sun. So here we get into Gerald Massey. He was, I think he was 18th century or 19th century Egyptologist. But he was hundreds of years ahead of his time in my mind. Popular belief preserves many of the precious relics of the past. So here he's talking about December. The serpents become blind in this reader. The reader is told that on December 19th, the serpents become blind, and on the March 24th, they open their eyes. This was the Egyptian calendar, right? Serpents have to read the serpent of the year. We have read the serpents of the year, the dual symbol of the two truths of periodicity, which were represented by the 9 months of gestation and the 3 months of the inundation, or by the serpent seeing during the 9 months and being blind the other 3. The month Missouri, or rebirth of the rivers, found typified by Horus the elder with a snake in his hand. The inundation was also called the burial of the serpent. The blind serpent is the sloughing serpent during the age of its skin. The serpent may be said to go blind right? And you look that up. I'll show you that later. Snakes' eyes cloud over and they stop showing interest in eating when they shed their skin. This occurs 2 to 5 times a year and takes about 2 weeks. Right? The younger serpents, it's like they set up to 9 times, and the older ones, it's 2 to 4 times. That seems pretty significant if you look at the numbers. For the period of the new moon to reach the full moon would be, right? So you think of the new moon is the closed eye, then the full moon is like the open eye. And then we have the twins of Gemini, or Castor and Pollux. Right, Paul goes blind. Saul and Paul are an alliteration of Saul and Paul. In Acts 9, we have, he's fallen upon the earth, he hears a voice saying, Saul, Saul, why dost thou persecute? And he says, who art thou, Lord? And the Lord says, I'm Jesus. And it's hard for thee at the pricks to kick. Trembling also and astonished, he said, Lord, what dost thou wish me to do? Then he says, arise, enter into the city, and it shall be told what it behoveth thee to do. And the men who are journeying with him stood speechless, hearing indeed the voice, but seeing no one. And Saul arose from the earth, and his eyes having been opened, beheld no one, and leading him by the hand, they brought him to Damascus. And he was 3 days without seeing, and he did neither eat nor drink. That's interesting that he didn't see for 3 days, and the serpents don't see for those 3 months. And then of course, serpents are self-eating and self-renewing. So it's the perfect image of time, or Cronus in the Greek mythology, who devours his children. And then every serpent set in heaven represents a different idea relating to time and season. The 4 elements each had their serpent, so that's interesting. Keti are serpents. Fire, Neph represents breath, Hydra, water. One serpent typified matter, another the hawk-headed. When Ahura Mazda formed the Garden of Delight, the Eden of the Avesta, the first thing created in opposition by the dark mind was the flowing serpent. As Kim Rao Dehetem. This is the serpent in paradise, which is represented as tempting the woman to sin. Its original nature is shown by the epithet of a flowing or running. This was thought by Huag to refer to the ejection of venom. So they've turned it into rain. The serpent typified the moist substance, primeval matter, etc. Fabled to be eaten in order that the spirit might become fleshed and embodied. It was the spirit of rain or of wet in the occult sense, as the alternating type was the serpent of heat fire or the head of the hawk. In that sense, you eat of the serpent, then you're eating of like the body of Christ. The circle of transformation of the snake was the period of gestation, and the Hindu sepulture reunites the serpent with human origins. The slowing of the serpent was performed in the stripping naked of the devotees to be clothed anew. Proclus Lycaeus, called the successor, was a Greek Neoplatonist. Proclus states that in the most holy mysteries, the mysti were divested of their garments to participate in the divine nature. The new robe was the garment of salvation, and it was accounted sacred to the last, never to be cast off, till worn out, and if possible the Mestai were buried in this raiment, which they had been divinely invested with. Their life was serpent-like renewed. Serpent was the great emblem of mystery in the mysteries, and this picture will show us one reason why. It was adopted as a type of feminine pubescence on account of its slowing and self-renewal. The symbol of reclothing and rebirth in the mysteries was its final phase. So there's a symbol of the sarcophagus of Seti I. This would be like Egyptian, the god Set, I guess. There is a picture of a serpent born by the 9 gods in a line reaching from head to tail. Serpent of 9 is Nanuti, the cord in which the elect souls, the reborn, are bound up forever and saved in the fields of heaven. The number is ideographic, and it makes the cord analogous to the collar with 9 beads denoting childbirth. Another thing I noticed here is the elect souls. Is that another theme we're seeing in the pre-Egyptian religions? When the Nashash, right, that's a word for serpent from the Hebrew, was lifted up as the savior on the cross, or by the Hebrews in the wilderness, or the Mexicans in their sacred processions, the dragon of darkness had passed out of the primal phase and become the good demon, which was looked up to in the temple of the Jews until the image was cast out by Hezekiah. The Pueblos still hold in reverence the great snake to whom Montezuma, right, he's talking about the Book of Kings that we looked at before. Or maybe that was Josiah. Anyways, it was probably in the Book of Kings. The Pueblos still hold on reverence the great snake to whom Montezuma, Moses-like, commanded them to look for life. So it's kind of the same story going on as in the Book of Numbers. The dragon retained its character of good demon, with the Chinese leaving the serpent to bear the curse of the eschatological change. Chinese genii, when their earthly work is done, still ride to heaven on the dragon's back. With the Japanese, likewise, the dragon is reverenced as the Agatho demon. Saturn also was designated the dragon of life. And of course, Saturn has significance in the Jewish religion and symbolism. It is the top of the 7 spheres. But yeah, they worship on Saturday, or Saturn Day. Okay, here's a lot of text. New creation by Ra shows the scene of conversion. In this, the old serpents, who were the enchanters, deluders of chaos, perverted through their intelligence, are turned into serpents of Seb, or Cronus. I guess the southern half of the zodiac would be Seb or Jeb in the myth of Newt and Jeb. I think Jeb is also Seb, if I'm not mistaken. And I guess he's called Cronus in the Greeks' mythology. And that would be time, or the southern hemisphere. Who is commanded to do that they do keep time henceforth as true intelligencers to men. Right? We remember that the serpent was called intelligent. Time was the antithesis of disorder, falsehood, dissolution, The Osirian in the other world rejoices that there is a time in his body. As the opposite of negation, non-existence, and return to the elementary condition of chaos. In the Bundahish, the dark spirit meets and joins hands with the bright spirit in the twilight, and thus becomes a co-creator or time in the round of night and day. The serpent of darkness that lies in the bend of the great void, the solar north, was part of the circle of time in which the dark of night is as necessary as the light of day. Hence the Apophis, the wounded and maimed overcome when fettered fast to the bottom could never be destroyed. This is the Midgard serpent which Thor fished for. Right, it's interesting that Thor is fishing, right? Fisher of men. And I wonder how similar Thor is to Thoth. Anyway. And he nearly broke in two as he lifted one part of it so high aloft. The coil around and the compasser of the earth, but only just long enough to make ends meet with the touch of head and tail. Thus being in the primal form of the serpent, it will naturally come to an end in the final destruction at the last day, when the deluder and devourer of the dark will not be resuscitated in the world of universal and eternal light, where time shall be no more. So it's interesting that he nearly broke it in two because it is the summer and winter months. In the Buddhist account, the same monster of darkness, or dragon of eclipse, was depicted as being cut in two halves by Indra, and the head and tail of the dissevered devourer were then set in heaven as time, symbols to represent the ascending and descending nodes of the moon, which the lunar eclipses depend. Drummond observes that from the most remote antiquity, the 2 points at which the ecliptic and the moon's orbit intersect each other were called the head and the tail of the dragon. That's interesting. The typology of the tree has yet to be traced and interpreted. Here it is affirmed that the mythical tree, like the pillar and the mount, is a type of the celestial pole. So that's interesting. Like, I might call the trees as the equinoxes, not the poles. Or I guess the solstices would be another way. But again, if you look in the sky, it rotates around the pole star, which seems to be associated with the summer solstice, in my mind. It's in the north. Lucian, a Greek satirist in the 2nd century, asserts that a virgin delivered the oracle at Delphi, whence the symbolic constellation Virgo, and a dragon spoke from under the tripod because of the constellation Draco among the stars. The tripod was also a form of the tree. The tree with the 7 branches appears as the tree of knowledge on the cylinders, accompanied by the sun, moon, and 7 stars. This is the tree of the serpent and the pair, male and female, as in the book of Genesis. It's interesting that these 7 branches are called the tree of knowledge, or part of this tree of knowledge, and that would be parallel to the 7 chakras in the human body. And I guess Nazareth means branch as well, right? So I guess which one is Nazareth? Well, that would probably be the top branch. Moreover, the supremacy of the dragon as the watcher and guardian of the tree of knowledge, or the pole, is especially connected with the sun in the sign of the bull. And about the time of the sun's entrance into the sign of the ram, crocodile god of darkness, Kavak, was turned into a Sebek Ra, wearing the head of a ram with the erect serpent. The Sebek, so you actually look at a picture of this, it looks like he still has an alligator head, but if you Google it, that is actually still Sebek Ra. The Sebek Hepts of Egypt considered the ram to be a lamb. Which is interesting. So ram is the same as lamb in Egypt. A biune type of either sex, right? In the Persian planisphere, the ram figures as a lamb. This is the lamb in the book of Revelation. Or as John says, behold the Lamb of God, right? So, the book, A Natural Genesis, I'm continuing here. We've got a long ways to go. From the African myth, it says Hatziabib, as divinity or spirit of the tree, identifies himself not only with but as the tree when he says, I shall infect you. Here we see the serpent, or the spirit of the tree, communicating the knowledge of good and evil in the act of warning them against the evil, whereas the subtle serpent or the sly Mu Pella tempts them to eat of the tree of death. Thus the spirit of the tree is demonstrably based on the quality of its fruit, and afterwards a motive is assigned to this as an active agent personified. Alcoholic drinks were taken in the ancient mysteries to induce an abnormal condition and excite the power of prophecy and divination. In the Rig Veda, the gods are said to get drunk and to obtain immortality by drinking the immortal stimulant, Amartyam Madam. They all drink copiously the first thing in the morning, are drunk by midday, and dead drunk by night with the third libation. Their followers also drink the soma juice to attain the privileges of immortality and to know the gods. Right, so this drunkenness has a certain time, and it has nighttime as its symbol. And that makes sense because Virgo reaches out for the grapes. Thor is said to smite the head of the serpent with his hammer, or Philopholt. The form of the swastika, or a four-footed cross, and therefore an equivalent to the four-armed cross established on the serpent's head. Page 432. So here I have a picture of the Big Dipper. We have at the four parts of the year, and you look at it in relation to the North Star, it forms what would look like a swastika. And I guess this would be near the head or the top of that arch of the serpent. Kundalini in yoga is the latent female energy believed to lie coiled at the base of the spine. Right, the yoga was pre-Christian. In Sanskrit, it literally means snake. This Kundalini, not the yoga. Yoga is actually the yoke that Christ talks about. The exact origin of Kundalini yoga is unknown, but the earliest known mention dates to sacred Vedic collection of writings known as the Upanishads, 1000 BC to 500 BC. Historical records indicate that Kundalini was a science of energy and spiritual philosophy before the physical practice was developed. In yoga, the life force energy, otherwise known as prana, right, travels through the subtle body in a series of channels called nadis. These nadis intersect at points of intensified energy called chakras. Sanskrit word for wheel, Chakras are spinning vortexes of energy in the subtle body that correspond to the various glands along the spine and inside the skull. So these 7 chakras would correspond to the 7 visible planets of the ecliptic as well. Most likely. The top 3 chakras are Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, corresponding to the cardinal fixed and mutable signs. And here I just put it in a picture. Because again, Brahma is probably where Abraham came from. And then Shiva is often the Christ. Right, he's connecting the head, the body, he's the mediator. And then he also seems to be like this, doing work at the solar plexus as the sun god. But yeah, it's the 7 or 70 7 summer months and the 5 winter months. Or you can have the 9 and the 3 again. The 3 are blind. And then of course you have Genesis 49, where again we're getting back to these 12 tribes of Israel. And in Genesis 49, what does it say? It has 12 blessings of the 12 fathers of Israel. And you look at Dan, and it says, Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan shall be a serpent by the way, not in the way, but he's by the way. An adder in the path that biteth the horse's heels, so that his rider shall fall backwards. Right, the way was this earlier sect or brotherhood, and I believe it refers to the ecliptic or the zodiac circumference. And the serpent, by the way, seems to be either Hydra or it could be the Scorpio, could be very much could be the Milky Way itself. I have waited for thy salvation, O Lord, parallel to Achilles' heel. Or Jacob holding Esau's heel. Right. It looks like he's trying to pull him back into the womb or belly of the mother. So that's something that could be looked into further. Sagittarius appears to shoot an arrow at the heel of Ophiuchus, or it would be from the story of Achilles, I guess. Serpent woman Lilith of rabbinical tradition, speaking under this type of Osirified deceased, says, I pass through substances, pierce the darkness. Hidden reptile is my name, the soul of my body is the serpent of life. Alright, so we're actually getting into Gerald Massey's second book now. And these are things that, again, I just thought were significant to understanding the symbols and texts. I don't have to cover them again. Significance, association to the serpent and the soul. Alright, so far we've seen that the serpent is the soul. The serpent seems to be also the flesh which you eat of to incarnate. So it seems to be parallel to soul or spirit. Right? Think of the New Testament, they drink from the wine or the grape drink. And it gives them life. With the serpents, types of the time cycles. So right, Seems like in Egypt, serpents are representing time cycles now, are made subservient to the solar deity. These serpents, or timekeepers, are to be told by Seb that for a long time it was the sun god himself who has been giving them light. This is the new revelation communicated by Ra, who is now established as the god by himself in the completed creation in which star time, planetary time, lunar, lunisolar, and solar time are perfected. And I guess Ra was usually associated with the summer solstice, which would be the gate of the heaven. Significance, time determines context and nature. That's a preterist idea. When Ptah had made the passage of the waters below, his son Atum, or other representative of Ra, became the sun in the third region, the Amenti, known as the Afra, just as the 12 signs followed the 9 divisions. So the sun god now appears in his bark, with the serpent twined around him in the 12 loops. I wonder if Afra is where we get Afro. Probably. Just as the 12 signs followed the 9 divisions, right? Or the completion of blindness follows that 9 months of birth, in a sense. The serpent twined around him the 12 loops, a figure of 12 equivalent to the 12 signs of the final zodiac. The Kabbalists are right in affirming that there were various pre-Adamic creations of which they possess some scattered remains, but have published no true explanations. Also, the father Atum in Egypt was preceded by the female Atum, who is the mother goddess of time. The genitrix alone being the giver of birth to the beginnings, right? The female Atum is kind of like Cronus or Seb or Mother Earth, who represents time, which is the incarnation of the flesh. The serpent coils, the son of the ecliptic, which is, remember, it's called the father. It is related to the rabbinical legends that Lilith, who was Adam's first wife, beguiled the serpent at the gate of Eden to lend her its form for the time and the purpose of temptation. The serpent, being a type of the two truths, has 2 aspects, and that Lilith represented both of these may be gathered from the tradition preserved by Comestor, that while the serpent remained erect, it had a virgin's head. The serpent and Lilith were types of the Virgin Mother in mythology. So it's interesting because the head is authority, and it's kind of like Eve has authority over the serpent in a sense that she's doing what it says, and she's gaining the knowledge of good and evil. And you can look up the legend of the first woman. Association here is between the serpent and the virgin. Epiphanius has bequeathed a few fragments of the Gospel of Eve, a book of the Ophite sect, who revered the serpents as the inductor of the primal pair into the mysteries of wisdom. Significance: association of the serpent with Eve or Virgo, and the primal pair, Bootes and Virgo, into the mysteries of wisdom. So this is kind of another confirmation of what Enoch has already told us, where the tree is actually called Tree of Wisdom. Originally, they were physiological demonstrations and Eucharistic rites intended to teach obedience to human law and bind to fealty by the sacred covenants. They knew what the typical serpent was that beguiled the woman, and the true nature of the seed, which is what their malignant opponents never have known. So if you look at this section, it talks about basically sexual intercourse, right? The snake in the bush sort of idea. And child making. According to the second recension of the Targum Jerusalmi, and that just means interpretation of Torah, or an interpretation, God is said to have clothed the pair with the slough of the serpent. Right, so we get back to that theme. He made them a garment of honor from the serpent's skin. This typified periodic renewal and was the means of renewal which they had lost by the sin that caused their nakedness. On account of its slowing, the the serpent was also a symbol of healing. Another rabbinical tradition records the belief that the nails of the human body are the sole remains of Adam's coat or clothing which he wore previous to the fall. And that kind of, I don't know if the nails are a good idea. The clothing, again, I've already explored how it represents the sunlight, or the 7 colors of the sun, multicolored dream coat of Joseph. Significance here is the connection of the Torah to the renewal of the skin, or the serpent skin. So here I talk about the philosophical polarities of the 2 trees. In the epistle to Diogenes, attributed to Marcion, who is thought to be one of the original Christians, the writer says, "Not without significance is it written that God originally planted the tree of knowledge and the tree of life in the midst of paradise, pointing to this, that through knowledge cometh life. Since the first man have not made a pure use of the same, the tree of knowledge, they were tempted by the serpent and divested of the life. For there is no life without knowledge, and no certitude of knowledge without true life, for which reason the trees were planted beside each other." Philosophical polarities, right? But if you look at where the trees were actually planted, I'm just going to look at something else for a second here. You can see here, how can I actually show this? But it's the idea that at the east end, it says March 21st. In Aries, that would be the tree of life, in a sense, in my mind. And again, you look at the text in Genesis, it says it was planted in the east. And then, where's the tree of knowledge planted? It's in the center of the garden. Well, the center of the garden here, according to the human body, would be the belly, right? So the center of that garden is in the west. So that's why it doesn't say it's in the west. It says it's in the center because it's the center of the human body. Because if it was planted in the west, then you'd have to say, well, it's the same, east and west is the same thing, right? Because they're imaginary ideas. So you have the 2 trees planted not in the east and the west, but in the east and the center. So I had to point that out. And I noticed that actually listening to some of Jordan Peterson actually yesterday. So. Okay, back to our study. The Hebrew Genesis is as unfair to the serpent as it is to the woman. In the Greek mythos, the good serpent guards the tree of life and knowledge, instead of tempting mankind to eat the forbidden fruit and cause their fall. So the goddess of wisdom is seen inviting Heracles or Hercules or some other character to partake of it. And when he has slain the guardian dragon of the tree, the spoil itself is returned to the keeping of Athena, who replaces it on the tree of knowledge, as the fruit which rightly plucked is the food of life, wrongly is the fruit of death. This is the true and perfect myth of the serpent. So that kind of just affirms what we've already seen with the New Testament. In other representations, it is Horus, the seed, the Savior's son, who is depicted as the bruiser of the serpent's head. We may well say bruiser, for the serpent could not be killed outright. A conflict which was primarily that of light and darkness, the sun and the Ake monster, the truth and falsehood, life and death, heaven and hell, was continued forever. Though wounded every night and vanquished every springtide, the dragon never dies on account of the phenomena which gave it birth and being. So here's the connection between Horus and the emphasis on bruising as it is in the Bible. When the sun enters Virgo, the mother for his rebirth, the passage was very marked by the total setting of the celestial Hydra, following which the fight began in the underworld between the dragon and the seed of Isis, or the son of Virgo. So there's an Egyptian connection between Horus and the seed, in the battle in the heavens. The Virgin Mother conquered the old dragon by producing her child, the seed in season every year. She was portrayed as Virgo with the sun in her arms and the seed in her hands, and on the birthday of the sun, which has become our Christmas day, the position of the sphere shows the figure of the Virgin treading down or triumphing over the serpent that writhes prostrate at her feet. She is the bruiser of the serpent's head through the birth of Horus the child. So here the mother and the son are engaged in eternal conflict with the serpent. In this delineation, Isis Circe has noosed the serpent of evil, and she is assisted by Osirian, such as one speaker just quoted, has brought the enemy to Horus for him to bruise the monster's head and give him his annual wound. The Virgin Mother conquered the old dragon by producing her child, the seed in season every year. She was portrayed as Virgo with the sun in her arms, or the seed in her hands, and on the birthday of the sun, which has become our Christmas day, the position of the sphere shows the figure of the Virgin treading down or triumphing over the serpent that writhes the prostrate at her feet. She is the bruiser of the serpent's head through the birth of Horus. Yeah, it's similar. So here I just wanted to look at his mentioning of the hiss of the serpent to lightning. So there's a connection there. The serpent kind of prepares this idea of lightning. And then here the serpent has the same numerical value of the letters as Nashash, or the Messiah. Maybe not Jesus Christ, but Mashiach with the serpent. The Ophites identified the serpent that seduced Eve with Jesus Christ. It is a symbol of the Logos, which Tertullian says referred to the Christ. So the Jewish Kabbalists identified the Messiah. So here you have the Persian scriptures, and he's comparing it kind of to the book of Revelation. The millennium arrives, the old heaven of the 7 or 70 divisions passes away. The tree of the heptanomis, or primary heaven, of 7 divisions which are figured by the 7 branches of the tree, not only seen by Zarathustra, but also represented on the Assyrian monuments, as well as on the Kamite planisphere, is superseded in the new heaven of the 12 signs and 72 deacons by the tree of healing for all nations. Hushadar, son of Zarathustra, is born from Lake Phrazdan, and the creatures become more progressing. He utterly destroys the fiend of serpent origin. The last of the prophets, Soshians, is born. Suffering crucified Christ of the true mythos is the son of autumn. Right, think of autumn as AU is the symbol of gold, the trees turn gold in autumn. The cross, or his suffering, is that of the autumn equinox, formed by the juncture of the equator and meridian. Plutarch tells us how the 22nd of Paofi was celebrated by the Egyptians as the nativity of the props, or supports of the sun. Suffering of Christ in autumn, well, yeah, because the days are getting shorter, right? After the equinox, the days get shorter. So the sun is suffering. But this could be like the annual cycle. So these props, or the stay of the suffering sun, was the stauros, which was primarily a stake for supporting, shaped as a cross. Thus Horus the crosser was called stauros by the Gnostics. The serpent was an emblem of the autumn sun, personated by Harpocrates, and the serpent lifting up the cross in the later symbolism was a sign of this suffering, transforming and renewing Christ, not as a cross of death, but of life and sustenance. The fragments of ancient lore which formed the nucleus of the Hebrew writings are part and parcel of the same system of primitive typology as the kindred legends found elsewhere. The creation, the tree, serpent, fall, deluge, exodus, and wars in heaven belong to the same mythology, which is one in origin, and more or less universal in its range. It could not be known what the scattered remains first signified until the puzzle picture had been put together again and correlated to be read in the light of evolution, which points us toward a natural genesis that is certain to put an end to the Hebrew beginning. Okay, so that was my last slide. I'm surprised we got through all that. Where are we at? Okay. We're at 50 minutes, yeah. So I wasn't sure we were going to get through all that, but there's one thing I noticed in here that I threw in an earlier slide. And so I just threw in a few of these back when we were talking about the 72. Right, remember when Jesus talks about picking up snakes and drinking poison? Well, I noticed something when we revisit the text after that. I just threw this in here, where it talks about the 70 who come back from going out to the city and seeing Satan fall like lightning from heaven. And then that's where Jesus says that, right? So it was a numerological rule that 70 could have the equal value as 7 because it was common to add the digits. I think we saw that a little bit before. In this way, the 70 are the 7 summer months, 7 churches, chakras, planets. I think more importantly, they're the 7 summer months on the Zodiac. So that's how you understand all this stuff. They wage war against the bodies of darkness or the constellations. And then I talked about the 72. I gotta move that picture, looks like. And so Massey says elsewhere, instead of 70, various ancient authors read 72. Both numbers bear witness to the astronomical mythos. 70 was the number of divisions in the earlier heaven, when Sut was the manifester, Messiah, or Metatron. The angel Metatron was lord over the 70. He was the name personified, and was called by the 70 names. One of the rabbis writes, I have asked Metatron, why art thou in common with the Creator, designated by the 70 names? The answer given is, because I am holy Enoch. And Enoch, of course, seems to live for 360 days, which is, he would be another, like, sun god, I guess. And, so he has these 70 names. He kind of represents the year. This is corroborated by the Book of Enoch, in which the son of the woman is superseded by the son of man. The Messiah, who became the Deo Soli, in the later heaven of the 12 signs and the 72 duodecans. Right, so the extra constellations are called decans. I think there's 36 of them. But in, like, the traditional cults of Christianity, deacons are church leaders, and pastors are the church leader who's over the deacons. And pastor means star. So here it says, or Lord of the 72 disciples, in the gospel version of the mythos. There is also the same confusion of the 70 with the 72 as in the gospel. According to Luke, the 70 or 72 are those whose names are written in heaven. And we talked about that. Right, so as soon as you start looking into this stuff, you realize that there's other people who have seen it before, like Gerald Massey. So 70 being the number in the earlier, 72 in the later heaven. Once every year, the 70 starry serpents, who warred with the serpent, scorpion, and the evil powers of darkness, came into the presence of their Lord to be judged according to their work. I might do another study just exploring how the law is, the law of Moses is the Zodiac as well. In the same manner, the 70 or 72 returned again. In the Kamite mythos, Sut was cast out to become the devil, and in this scene of the 70 or 72, the dethronement is described. Jesus said unto them, I beheld Satan falling as lightning from heaven. Right, so again, we have like the serpent has the hissing of the serpent kind of foretells lightning, and then we have Jesus foretelling lightning. And as a matter of course, the 12 implied the 72. But all that the mythos had here bequeathed to the agnostics was entire ignorance as to whether the number of these whose names were written in heaven should be 70 or 72. So he's kind of making fun of a literalist, a literal historical interpretation. He's saying that that's not the case. And then we get back to my old PowerPoint. I know that was a long video, and that there was something else I did not mention, which was this idea of Israel is the church, or Jesus is always Israel, right? Jesus refers to the church as Israel, or his body. And so here's a bunch of verses you can look at, and you can compare to see how Israel is always the church. So then Israel in a way is this serpent that's connected to this idea of the heavens and the earth. And then also might be helpful for this particular study is you can go on my Facebook page You can go to my notes here, and I have a bunch of studies that I've kind of thrown up on here that could be related. I just want to point out a few of them. Like there's the hell means winter, which is related. I actually have my serpent quotes from the Natural Genesis here. They're not the same. They're not going to be the same quotes that I used in the PowerPoint, but they were still. I still found them interesting before. So I could always repost that, but for now this will be helpful. And then as you scroll down, you'll see Israel is the Stars, part 3. If you want the other parts, you can just ask. And again, that gets back to the Israel serpent that I said I would talk about at the beginning of the PowerPoint, and I never actually got around to it. And then you have Daniel's 70 weeks, the number 70 showing up again. And then it could be some more useful ones here, just talking about the harvest seasons and the new heavens and the new earth and the second death and stuff, and the Daniel 2 body statue. I don't know if I actually talked about the heavenly body in the Daniel 2 study here. This is kind of getting into my older studies back in 2018, where I was talking about full preterism. And so yeah, that's basically what I wanted to show you. Thanks for watching. Have a good night.